just turn it on because I don't want to forget. So what is Pen and Anvil? When we're on, when you'll see that. Was Pen and Anvil associated with BU? Pen and Anvil Press? Is this what it is?
No.
Okay. So
I mean, we're all kind of at BU. Zach is at BU, but it started independently.
And does it have an office?
He does have an office. It's on Newbury Street somewhere, but
Really?
yeah.
Boy, you must have some funding for that.
He just told me about it. But this is new, though. The office is kind of new. Yeah.
Is that his livelihood, or?
No, his livelihood. He's the administrator in the core curriculum.
Oh, okay.
So that's his main livelihood.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. And that's how I know him.
Okay. Yeah, he contacts me every once in a while.
Okay. Yeah, he's very competent.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah.
Has he been there at BU a while?
He's been there for a while.
Yeah.
He's been at core for as long as I remember. I mean, I've been...
Because I thought there was a younger guy there who does stuff for Pen and Anvil Press.
I'm not sure who it is.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but I mean, there's a group of people he works with.
Yeah.
You know, but Zach's kind of at the head of it.
Yeah. Zachary Brothers, was that it? Is he part of the Zachary Brothers thing?
I don't think so. I'm not sure. I don't think so. Yeah.
I never met him. I just for the email.
Zach was.
He's a little arch, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. He's a good guy.
Yeah, he's a good guy.
Yeah. Zach was. I brought him into. I used to work. I was a senior editor of. I don't know. It was around. It's still around, but not. No one sees it anymore. It was called the Republic of Letters.
Yes, Saul Bellows.
Yeah, Saul Bellows thing.
Yeah.
So I was a senior editor of that for a while.
I was going to ask you about that. Yeah.
Yeah, and then.
What's the one that the Partisan Review or something closed at BU?
Partisan Review closed down.
Yeah. Doesn't Don share there for a while?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Partisan Review closed down. So there, I worked with the Republic of Letters, and brought Zach into that, and so Zach helped out with, kind of as like a deputy editor for a while.
Great.
So
let's get rid of it. You got a great blurb from Rosanna Warren.
Oh yeah, Rosanna was. She was actually one of the readers on my PhD dissertation.
Oh wow.
Yeah. And that book on the 10th century poet Rudaki with the translations.
Okay.
That kind of grew out of my doctoral dissertation. Every time I see myself, like on a
we'll be on
picture or screen or something, I realize how much less hair I have than the previous time.
That's when you grow a beard. You know, you probably grow a very distinguished white one. Right?
Mine comes out pretty white too. Yeah.
I just tell people, if I stand on my head, I have a full head of hair. Good afternoon. I'm here with my guest, and let me pronounce it, Sassan Tabatabai.
That's right.
Oh my God, because I usually butcher names, so it must be something. But anyway, I'm going to give you a brief introduction. He's come out with a new book called Uzunburun.
Uzunburun.
And that's a mountain range or a mountain?
It's actually a fish.
Oh, a fish. Where did I get a mountain?
The Damavand is a mountain. There's another poem about a mountain.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. I got that.
It's in the same poem, though.
Oh, okay. I got them confused. Okay. Anyway, it's a fish. Okay, great. Anyway, what do we know? Elizabeth Bishop's had a great poem about a fish, right? Right. Okay. Anyway, in this author's first standalone collection of poetry and translations, Sassan Tabatabai has composed a book of delicate mourning, exile, and love. Voices and scenes from classical literature, Petrarch, Milton, the Odyssey, blend with impressions of childhood, fits of romantic longing and moments of alienation. The wide topical and emotional ranges of these poems is bound together by the measured levels of Tabatabai's verse. The clear and unadorned style of his poetry and translation reveals the author's unspoken respect for language and for the histories which lay behind each word. And Sassan is born in Tehran. He came here in 1980, and he's a poet and scholar of medieval Persian poetry. He's the author of Father of Persian Verse, Rudaki and His Poetry. He teaches humanities and Persian literature at Boston University and Boston College, and is poetry editor for the News from the Republic of Letters. And you just had a new appointment as head of the
head of the Persian language program at Boston University.
Oh, that's great. Now, I'm going to go into some, stuff about your. First of all, you're a boxer, right? And so I don't want to piss you off here. No, nothing like that. But and there's a lot of interest around that. I read an article in Bostonia about it, and you think that people find it unusual that a poet would have this very visceral, physical aspect to them. I mean, is this a surprise to most people, you think?
To most people, it is a surprise, yes.
And why do you think people just would not associate a poet with...
Well, I think they consider poetry to be something so soft and emotional sometimes, and then boxing being the complete opposite of that. But believe it or not, they have a lot in common. There's something philosophical about boxing, I find. Something that teaches you a lot about yourself. It's a kind of deep introspection, that you get from poetry and you also get from boxing.
Okay. Do you know any poet boxers other than yourselves? Muhammad Ali was sort of...
Muhammad Ali was kind of a poet boxer.
Yeah.
Not really, to be honest with you. There's a lot of writers who, enjoyed the boxing, dabbled in boxing. Hemingway comes to mind.
Yeah.
Certainly. Nabokov, apparently.
He did?
Yes.
And he was with the butterflies in boxing?
He took some boxing lessons.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
There is certainly a connection between, the sport and the literary world, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Now, you are the poetry editor for the Letters, the Republic of Letters, founded by Saul Bellow, one of my favorite writers, and many others, of course. Did you ever work with Bellow? Is the question.
I worked with Bellow.
Yeah. Tell me about your impressions of him, and I've seen him lecture. You don't want to mess with this guy.
No. In my experience, Bellow was very kind.
Okay.
And very generous with his time.
Okay.
By the time I started working with the Republic of Letters, Bellow was partners with one of my old professors, Keith Botsford.
Okay.
And that's how I got introduced into the Republic of Letters. And by the time I started working with Bellow was already quite old.
Yeah.
He was already quite old. Most of it was really running things by Bellow and just getting his approval.
Was he still sharp? Or?
He was still sharp.
Yeah.
At that point, he was still sharp, and it kind of deteriorated slowly over time as he got much older.
Okay.
But yeah, so from the time I met Bellow, he was already kind of on the older side.
But what were your impressions of him? What did you take away from your experience with him?
He seemed to be. He had a very piercing look. Right? When he would look at you, you could see that he's kind of looking right through, and I don't know, maybe formulating you as one of his characters or something. But he seemed to always very sharp with detail. It seemed to me. you know, and even when he was getting older, he was still very sharp with all the material he had read in the past. Right, so as his memory started to fail a little bit, it was more the day-to-day things, and not really the store of literary knowledge he had in him. That stayed pretty sharp, I think,
to the very end.
Till the end, yeah.
Were you a reader of his works? Is it fiction?
Yeah.
What was your favorite? I liked Auguemont.
Yeah, certainly. I like Henderson, the Rain King.
Remains of the Day, was that?
Remains of the Day.
That was a good one.
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of them.
Herzog,
yeah.
That's a very good one, yeah. Now we'll get into your poetry, but I also was going to ask you about I noticed on the Rate My Professor, you wrote a defense of being a dork. Could you tell us a bit about this? We were talking about Rate My Professor and how no one looks at it, but occasionally I always look at mine. There's some good ones, but there's some real bad ones too.
There's some good ones. Yeah, this was, it's interesting. I don't know. It's, I guess MTV has a college channel.
Right.
And they came to BU and they approached a number of us to see if we'd like to be on this show called The Professor Strikes Back.
Okay.
So, and the whole thing was kind of goofy, to be honest with you. It was all in good fun. And so they would read something and ask you to respond. And one of the things was, well, he's such a dork.
Oh, okay. How did you defend yourself as a dork?
I didn't think I needed defending. I took it as a compliment.
Oh, you
I'm
did?
like, I'm absolutely a dork, yeah. I think
what is your definition of a dork?
I don't know. I kind of took it as meaning more like the nerdy type.
Right.
You know, with the glasses and the books, and so that was fine.
But you could be like Clark Kent and then just get into your boxing garb.
That's right.
And become the pugilist poet that you really are.
That's right.
Now, you translated the memoirs of your grandfather, who served in the Iranian army till the Islamic Revolution in 1979. It seems that the one dictatorship took over for another. How did your grandfather see it, and what happened to him after the revolution? And the other question is, since we're talking about translations, maybe you could just briefly touch on the particular problems of translating, getting the real essence of the words and the poem.
Sure. With my grandfather, yes, started as a military cadet when he was young, so he had a whole career in the military, and reached the rank of general before the revolution during the Shah. With the revolution, he went into exile, and we all left the country. And ultimately, he settled in Atlanta, Georgia. I inherited all his papers. His papers consist of memoirs and poetry. He was a poet himself. And I'm in the process of translating both the memoirs and the poetry now. Most of the memoirs, the military memoirs, are from the times when he was stationed in the mountains of Kurdistan in the north of Iran, right after World War II, when Soviet troops still occupied parts of Iran and hadn't left yet. So really fascinating stuff as far as, giving historical insight on a real human level as to the political situation, the historical situation of the time. As you asked me about the dictatorship, one supplanted the other. It did, but it was different. Before, during the monarchy, the kind of things people didn't have, the kind of liberties they didn't have, were mostly political liberties. So it was more of an autocratic state than anything else. After the Islamic Revolution, it becomes more social liberties that people don't have. Right, so having to abide by the strict Sharia law, putting all kinds of restrictions on your daily life, from the women having to cover their hair to prohibitions on alcohol, et cetera, things like that.
But I mean, if you talk against the Shah in public or whatever, you're screwed. You were screwed then, right?
Probably. Yeah.
You're screwed here too.
Chances are you wouldn't exactly. I mean, that in that sense, you really, it's not the kind of liberties we're used to living in the
United
U.S. where you can say anything you want, and you can say anything you want about whoever you want.
Right.
Right. You watch any Saturday Night Live skit, chances are the opening skit is some kind of satire on the president or the political system or something. There, it's you don't have those kind of liberties. You really didn't have it then. You still really don't have it now.
Okay. And tell me, I've spoken to David Ferry, and who was also, I think, put a blurb on your book, and the translator. I don't know if you know of Zephyr Press that puts out a lot of translations. Mr. Cates, his name is, I believe, runs it.
I've heard of it.
Yeah. But anyway, tell me, it must be difficult translating something from Persian to English and trying to maintain the sensibility and the nuances and everything. Tell us, layman, how that works in the specific form.
Translating poetry just creates all kinds of problems from any language. From Persian, the kind of things that don't really transfer, right, are the nuances of the language itself. For example, in Persian, our pronouns don't have gender, right? We don't distinguish between he and she. It's all u. So as a
but you do in society.
In society, you do, certainly. Right? So it's really the context that dictates what the pronoun is going to be once you're translating.
Right.
Right? There is, in Persian, you can, when it comes to poetry, the language becomes very flexible. You can do all kinds of inversions. Basically, all your grammar rules, all your rules of syntax, you can throw them right out the window when it comes to poetry. Turn the entire sentence structure on its head, which again becomes kind of difficult when you're dealing with English. Persian doesn't have any articles, right? So just the specific versus the indefinite, that in itself causes issues. But ultimately, I think when it comes to translating poetry, other than getting the sense down, right, you need to transfer the meaning of the poem. But at the same time, you can't kill the poem when you want to read it in English, because the difficult part about carrying something from one language into another in translation is the musicality of the lines. That becomes the main issue. So I think it was Oscar Wilde who said this, that a translation, a literary translation, is like a mistress. It's either faithful or it's beautiful, but very rarely both. So if
I know that well, of course.
So if you can strike a balance between the faithfulness to the meaning and the beauty of the original, then I think that's a successful translation.
That's great. And I'm going to use that quote, I think.
Okay.
I love stuff like that. Now, how aware of Persian verse in the U.S. American literary community? I mean, how aware of it? Is it greatly underrepresented? I mean, what do you say?
I would say yes and no. One of the poets that is hugely overrepresented is Rumi. Rumi, the 13th century mystical poet. Right? Rumi, believe it or not, just maybe a few years ago, was the best-selling poet in America.
Do you think he's overrated?
Well, yeah, I don't think he's overrated, because there's such depth to the material,
right,
to the poetry itself. Right? The stories, I'm teaching a class on Rumi this semester, so there is such depth to it, and it's mystical depth, it's spiritual depth, all presented in really playful lines. And there's something about Rumi that resonates with the modern reader. So in that sense, it's you find Rumi everywhere. But then again, the Persian canon is vast, and some of it's very lovely. And that is the stuff that's underrepresented.
Okay. Give us some names, for instance.
The great Persian epic poet is Ferdowsi, right? And he writes this epic poem, which is something like 60,000 couplets long. It's a huge monumental work, and that it's a chronology and genealogy of kings and heroes going back to mythical times and the creation of the world. And that is fantastic. So Ferdowsi's Shahnameh, it's called Shahnameh, translated as the Epic of Kings.
Tell me, is poetry, not contemporary poetry, but just the poetry you're talking about, Rumi and all that, is that sort of suppressed in current Iran?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
No. The poetry isn't. The poetry is interesting because it kind of becomes a vehicle for protest.
Okay.
If you remember a few years ago, was it 2 summers ago, after the elections in Iran, there was a whole uproar, especially by the young people, about Ahmadinejad being re-elected in very sketchy elections. The chant the protesters used is an adaptation of a few lines of Rumi's poetry, right, in the same meter and the same rhythm.
Oh, okay.
So everyone's steeped
Poetry
in
is a bit subversive then, right?
Absolutely. It's
Always has
subversive.
been.
Yeah.
If it's good.
Yeah, absolutely. So poetry is a huge part of life. It's been a huge part of Persian culture. The poetic tradition goes back 1,000 years, whereas the prose tradition really is quite modern. It's more of a 19th, 20th century phenomenon.
Okay.
Whereas the poetry, it's the kind of thing, I don't know, for example, talking to my grandfather when he was alive and when I was younger, and whatever point he wanted to make, he would always back it up with a few lines of poetry. So it seemed like everyone carried this store of poetic lines that they could...
Do you think that's true here?
Here I think if you're really into poetry, it's true.
Right, but it's
not
not
I think
the common
there,
guy.
It's not the common guy, whereas there, the common guy knows a few lines anyway.
Yeah. Good. Now, final question before we get into you reading some of your work is Caspian Summer. You focused on something your mother once said, come inside, it's almost dark. Mm-hmm. And you go into this sort of womb of memory, of sensory detail. I mean, is that sort of like a poetic prompt for you, that line from your mother? Like, we have prompts to generate poetry, is that, I'm wondering?
Well, that poem's about childhood memories.
Yeah.
Right? The Caspian Sea just played a big role for me growing up because there's all the wonderful memories of childhood summers where on the Caspian coast.
The humidity, the salt.
The humidity, the salt, the smell of the garlic.
The moist blanket.
The moist sheets. I mean, these are all things, even the smell of the sheets is still something I remember. And there was always a sense of we as kids playing outside, and at some point you always got called back to the house. Mm. So in that sense, part of the memories is a full sensory experience. It's it's taste, it's smells, it's sights, but it's also sounds. And part of that sound is the voice of my mother, really calling us back to the house.
Okay, that's beautifully done poem.
Oh, thank you.
Now, perhaps you can share some of your work with our viewers here. Whatever you choose to, we'd be glad to hear.
Well, since we talked about Caspian Summer, maybe I'll start with that.
Can't go wrong with that.
Okay. Again, this is childhood memories, growing up by the Caspian Sea. I can still hear my mother's voice sifting its way through the orange grove, broken by dusk and distance, calling me back to the villa on the hill, away from my August friends, local boys who didn't need sunscreen, who caught water snakes with their bare hands and carried frogs in their pants pockets. Come inside, she would say. It's almost dark. Inside the screened porch, safe from mosquitoes and night sounds, this glowing comfort awaited. The smell of fried garlic, the rattle of dice rolling on the wooden backgammon board, and moist, sticky tiles under my bare feet. Later, tucked into cool, damp sheets, my little sister asleep, I listen to the ebb and flow of adult conversations downstairs. Cornices of excitement, followed by lulls filled with the sea's silence. Its distant waves crashing, mute on the deserted shore. Strange that as autumn leaves bruise in New England, I can still taste the air of a Caspian summer, heavy with humidity and salt. Strange that as time thickens, the distance between us shrinks. There's a number of poems in here that are about really the things I remember growing up in Iran. The title poem, Uzunburun, we talked about this. Uzunburun's a fish. Uzunburun's a sturgeon. It's actually it's the sturgeon which gives caviar. So in a way, the poem is about hidden treasures that in one way or another really don't belong to the people. What happened after the revolution, caviar being such an expensive commodity, it was meant only for export and only for the internal elite, basically the religion, the Islamic elite of the country. So this poem is kind of about that. Uzunburun is what we call the sturgeon, but it's a word we borrow from Turkish, which literally means long nose. So if you've seen a sturgeon, they have a long nose.
I usually only see it on a bagel, not in its natural habitat.
Yes. And the Damovan you were talking about earlier, that's the mountain, the highest peak, and it's the headwaters of the Damovan that flow into the Caspian Sea where the fish lives. So this is Uzunburun. See how tall Damovan stands, its head held high above the clouds. It is silver-haired even in this green season. The sun reflects off the tangled locks that fall on the mountain's broad, colorless shoulders. Damovan had been like this long before you and I first looked up at its heights. Snow clings to the summit's every rise and fold like an old man's wrinkled face, lined by the contours of age. Strong northern features, angular nose and sunken eyes that seem to squint under the sun and swell with tears. Tears that slowly drip and at times, with a flashing wink, catch a fleeting ray. Soon, quiet streams will roll down the snowy face and rocky bosom through deliberate lines carved long ago. They follow their own ancient roots to a calm, expectant pool. Join and gather force before tumbling toward the valley below that lies cradled in shadows. And at the mountain's foot, the Caspian, this giant lake, this gentle sea, awaits the rushing waters to feed its depths. There, hidden from our eyes, suckles the sturgeon, Queen Uzunburun, blessed with the gift of laying golden eggs. Unlike you and me who watch from afar, her fate lies in the weathered hands of the old fisherman who slowly drags his net, taut with the Caspian's riches, onto the unyielding sand. And with it, the sturgeon is drawn to the edge of her world. She breaks the surface to a place rounded at the edges, and with a silent gasp, pumps her gills with inaccessible air. Suddenly aware of her own weight, she strains to return to the cool depths of home and lay her golden eggs, which now belong neither to herself nor to the fisherman. Let me see, I'll read another one. This is called Firestones. The Cardiff in this poem isn't in Wales. This is Cardiff, Southern California.
Okay.
I was collecting rocks on the Cardiff coast, a testimony to centuries of silt left on the shore, of sediment pressed into stone, sandstone, shale, tufa, travertine, jasper, flint. There was a stone that knew the sadness of the sea, that saved its secrets. It was pock-marked with holes and lay half buried in sand, eager to save the ocean's spray, like tears in its miniature pools. There was a stone that always rolled in place, It had rolled round and smooth with each wave, desperately trying to control the tide. There was a stone that showed rings upon rings placed by the sea over the years that kept time for the Pacific. There were stones that breathed sulfur, that sparked when they touched. Unremarkable in luster or shine, they were the lovers of the ocean, firestones, whose sparks were not dampened by salty waves. But they only made sense in pairs. And there was this one, more white, more brilliant, more polished than any stone. But it was once upon a shell. It needed centuries to become stone. It was a counterfeit firestone. It did not breathe sulfur. It could not make sparks. I traced my steps back along the Cardiff coast, and the stones I returned to the sands. The ocean's secrets would be well kept by the stones. Its tears would be stored in pools, its tides kept in check, its years measured in rings. But love itself I could not leave on the beach. I kept the firestones. Now that we're on the topic of love, maybe I'll read another love poem.
Always a popular subject.
That's always a popular subject, isn't it? Okay. This is, there's a number of poems in here inspired by the material in the humanities material I teach in class. This is a letter from Adam to Eve in old age.
I read that one. I like that.
Yeah. There's a at the end of Paradise Lost, as Adam and Eve are expelled from the Garden of Eden, Milton writes, the world was all before them, where to choose their place of rest and providence their guide. They, hand in hand with wandering steps and slow, through Eden took their solitary way. So this kind of traces them after that. It starts, Dear Eve, many moons have passed since that first day we left the garden with our heads hung low and our shadows cast. You remember how hot it was, how thirsty we were, how far we walked to find water and shade. Remember that first night, how dark it was, how scared we were, how naked we felt in our leaves. And that first winter, with its reluctant sun and thickening night, how we hugged to keep each other warm. Many winters have passed, and with each, I'm getting slower and smaller. We've been through much, and I know it wasn't easy for you. I still regret the way I treated you when he yelled at us for eating his fruit. I knew you needed my sympathy and support, but I called you stupid, and you cried. I wish I had held you instead, and kissed your head and told you it would all be fine. I wish I could have stood up to him. I wish we had taken a whole basket of that fruit. I remember the first time your belly swelled. I was nervous because you screamed and screamed, and I thought I would lose you and be alone. But a child was born, and he drank from your breast, and he clung to your skirt, and we learned life. I know it was hard when we lost Abel, and we lost Cain, and we learned death. For the longest time you wouldn't eat, or talk, or touch. But we've had good times too. Remember that first spring, the way it smelled, the way we felt, as if we had never left that long-forgotten place. Remember the time we drank from the vine we grew on the trellis in the back? You laughed because my eyes turned red and my teeth turned blue. That was the night I discovered you, the night I smelled you and tasted you. I realized how you squint when I kiss you and blush when I watch you. That night I found your nape and the curves of your waist and those two dimples low on your back. And you showed me the things a woman can do. It has ceased to be that way with me and you for a long time now, I know. But when I look at you, with your gray hair and wrinkled smile, I still see that wide-eyed girl trying to cover herself with leaves. As we reach the autumn of our lives, there is nothing I want more than to sit by your side and hold your hand and listen to your voice. My beautiful Eve, my love, my life, I thank you for giving meaning to my mortality.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.